If you are daunted by the thought of force feeding yourself to bulk for muscle or aggressively dieting to cut for fat loss, this episode will give you a new perspective. The question we're asking is, can you lose fat and build muscle at the same time without gaining or losing weight, but instead by eating at your maintenance calories to achieve the holy grail of body recomposition? My guest and I will break down what's possible and how to adjust your diet and training, and you'll learn about the realities of body recomp at maintenance and how to create an environment to get the results you want. Welcome to Wits and Weights, the show that helps you build a strong, healthy physique using evidence, engineering, and efficiency. I'm your host, Philip Pape, and today I've got something special lined up with my friend Jeff Hoehn, host of the Mind-Muscle Connection podcast. Jeff and I decided to tackle body recomposition, which is your ability to build muscle and lose fat at the same time, but from two different angles on our two shows. So today on Wits and Weights, you're going to hear us focus on the maintenance approach. Can you transform your body without drastically changing your calorie intake? And if you enjoy this conversation, make sure and follow Jeff's podcast, again, the Mind Muscle Connection, where I jump on as a guest to discuss body recomp, but using slight surpluses and deficits rather than maintenance. Now, if you guys don't know Jeff, he's been on the show a few times. We've collaborated for a long time. He's a great guy, a really honorable, authentic fitness professional out there. And he's helped lots of clients, probably hundreds, probably thousands at this point, transform their bodies with evidence-based methods. His knowledge in body recomp has made him kind of a go-to expert for people looking to do this. So that's why I thought this would be valuable for you guys. So I want you to listen carefully today to learn what you can and cannot do at maintenance to maximize your results, regardless of your experience level. All right, Jeff, thank you for coming on again, and welcome to the show. Let's get into it.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to chatting about this and having both of these angles here. I think it'll be super interesting for the listener.
Yeah, we were joking as we prepared for this that maybe we're going to disappoint people because everyone wants the holy grail of body recomp, and you hear like a lot of marketing around this, like, yeah, just build muscle, lose fat at the same time. I even hear some of the big names like Holly Baxter. She's actually going to be on the show, man, if you could believe it. Holly Baxter awesome. Is big into like, let's just stay near maintenance and you can build a ton of muscle and lose fat. So what I want to address first is like, what does the science say behind that in general? Can you lose fat and build muscle at the same time? And then we can get into like who and what situations can work at maintenance or not work. Yeah.
So like you said, it's kind of a misconception, right? That you can't, do both at the same time. And you certainly can. And the research does back this up. I know there was a study from Bearcat a couple of years ago, and they looked at advanced, people that have been training for a little while, and they were able to gain muscle and lose body fat, right? There's kind of that misconception that you need to, if you want to build muscle, you need to be in this like large surplus to do that. And again, I'm sure throughout this, we'll dive into the specifics of where that might be, feasible at and where that makes the most sense. But, a lot of people have, I tell people this, a lot of people have a lot larger of a runway to do this than they think. I think a lot of people just say, oh, I've been training for a couple of years, I can't do it. But again, as I'm sure we'll get into, there's a lot of things that go into it that people are not maximizing, where they're going to be able to, see this simultaneous fat loss and muscle gain. But again, it is that kind of holy grail is going to depend. It's going to be in the right situation. And I think our inputs are going to be super important as well in that process.
Yeah. So I really want to get right to what you probably hear and I hear as well. People that haven't gone through this before, haven't cut, haven't bulked, maybe aren't even tracking their nutrition. And they're like, I don't want to gain a bunch of weight because I'm going to get fat, and I don't want to have to diet because that sounds miserable. And I've tried it before. I really want to gain like 15, 20 pounds of muscle, and I want to do it at maintenance. Like, is that even possible? And again, we can break down from there, like the situations and scenarios behind it.
Yeah. So I think so let's, because I kind of, before we talked about this, we kind of had an outline planned out when we were talking about, my approach was we were going to talk about the maintenance side of things. And you said, lose fat and build muscle. I'm like, I kind of said, hey, I didn't want to ruin the episode right away by just saying, hey, being at maintenance, the downside with being at maintenance is you're not going to really lose any amount of body fat when you're truly at your maintenance, calories. And again, we can talk about what exactly maintenance calories is, but that's going to be the one downside. However, the question you specifically asked was, hey, I want to gain, say 15 to 20 pounds of muscle. Can I do that at maintenance? And I believe you can totally do that at maintenance calories, right? Now, in saying that, this is where it gets a little confusing, but if you're gaining tissue, and again, via muscle, you probably see your body weight trend up. So it's going to get a little confusing in terms of like, you may not actually keep your exact same body weight, right? So that's where things can get a little bit kind of confusing if you're just looking at numbers and based off of body weight, right? But if we're talking specifically, hey, you're at maintenance calories and you don't want to gain a ton of body fat, you can certainly do that. And again, I'll go into this, but I guess the thing that you could do though, and this is where maybe some people get confused, is, you could theoretically lose your body fat percentage could decrease by kind of taking this approach, right? Because again, you're increasing your lean body mass. And, again, if your weight's not really trending up a ton, you may see your body fat percentage decrease a bit here in this process. So I don't know if I answered your specific question on that, but
you did. And you hit the nuance on the head, right? There are a couple different subtle scenarios near maintenance. One of which you just said is you can build muscle. You may even gain weight. You're kind of at maintenance or slightly above, but your body recomp is changing without losing fat necessarily. But your body fat percentage goes down. It's just numbers. If you got more muscle as a percentage of your body, you have lower body fat percentage, and that is recomp. So I think people need to understand that. But you also said that you can't lose meaningful fat in terms of just pounds of fat unless you're in a deficit, which is a different situation. So when people understand that, if they have 20 or 30 pounds to lose of fat, is it the most efficient approach? And this leads me to the question of who is it right for? Who can benefit? Who should waste the time at maintenance, let's call it, when they should be in a deficit, versus those who would really maximize the results this way?
Yeah. So like you said, I mean, you're not going to get, you're not going to have this crazy amount of body fat loss here at this, right? So to me, who would benefit the most from this? Well, this is going to be somebody who maybe you're quote unquote skinny fat, or you've done a ton of diets in the past and you've just always focused on weight loss in the past, right? And usually that approach is going to lead to somebody not really ever focusing on hypertrophy style training. It was usually, the kind of avatar I'm thinking of is someone who cuts out all their carbs, goes super low calorie, just does a ton of cardio, right? And again, that's probably not going to be great from a muscle, lean body mass standpoint. So I think that person who's yo-yoed in the past and always focused on just weight loss and just being their small self, that's somebody who I think could benefit from being around their maintenance calories and really focusing on adding muscle in that process, right? You're not actively trying to see your body weight go down. Maybe it comes up a little bit, but you're, again, like we said, you're decreasing your body fat percentage. And again, you're kind of getting rid of that skinny fat look, right? So that's one person that I think would benefit the most from that. And then another person that would benefit would be someone who, again, muscle is, you want to add a ton of muscle, but you're also not necessarily as lean as you want to be yet, right? And so again, this kind of comes around to someone who's, again, always kind of fat loss dieted, or maybe you just don't want a fat loss diet right now, right? And again, adding more muscle is super important to you. To me, that's going to be someone who is going to benefit a ton from being at, their maintenance calories and trying to just focus on that. And again, you're not super lean either, right? Because the leaner you are, the tougher this is going to be to build muscle at maintenance. You're going to have to, have a little bit of body fat on your body. So I think really long story, it's going to be most beneficial for someone who's dieted a ton in the past. You aren't super lean, but you aren't, you're not super lean, but you also maybe aren't necessarily super overweight either, because again, in that situation, you probably would be better off kind of going at the approach, more of a fat loss kind of style approach there with that.
Yeah, it makes sense. And again, it always comes down to, it depends. What's your training history? What's your dieting history? What is your goal right now? Because I'm sure you've met lots of guys who have a little extra fat and they're perfectly fine to gain more weight because they want to get, some muscle and ultimately get jacked, but they're not ready for fat loss. So here's an interesting thing I've seen come up lately, Jeff, and I wasn't really aware of it so much more than a year and a half ago, but there are definitely a lot of influencers and some very respected guys out there who lift a lot who will say, you never really need to gain a lot of weight or be in a surplus. You could always be in a little bit of a maintenance plus mode, just riding just above maintenance and feeding yourself every day, never falling into a deficit really. And you can get tremendous results. And then you don't have to worry about gaining a bunch of fat. But then we have Helms et al., right? The study that came out, was it last year, that showed we could actually go more aggressively than we thought and not gain fat. So what is your thoughts on maintenance being kind of this holy grail for building muscle when it's like just above maintenance? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, again, the key is going to be you're going to limit body fat gain in that process. But again, if you're like on the leaner side and you already have a good amount of muscle, again, that's probably not going to be the right approach for you. You're probably going to need to be in a small surplus. And again, if you really want to build a ton of muscle, right? Like, I think that's another person that like you're going to probably need to be in a small surplus. But most people don't necessarily want to be bodybuilder style, muscle size, right? So like for them, to me, it makes a little bit more sense to not have to be in this surplus to then, kind of have to cut it all off later on, right? I just feel like people do a lot of kind of yo-yoing with that approach, right? And again, the big thing being like what we do in that process is super important, like maximizing our training, right? So it's geared towards hypertrophy, setting up your lifestyle so that you're in a good spot to add muscle, right? And then, same thing with nutrition, like making sure those things are dialed in. The more we can get all those things dialed in, the more likely you're going to be able to ensure that you're going to build muscle without, gaining body fat, really not needing as big of a surplus or needing one at all. So again, I think it really comes down to our methods and what we do. That's going to be the biggest thing. What I see happen a lot of times is people will think that the magic is gaining weight, and like, that's where they spend all their time, is like just trying to see their scale weight go up. Hey, I'm in a surplus, so I'm in a building phase. I want to try to add muscle, so I just want to see my scale weight go up. And that like is the main thing that they focus on in that process, and they kind of overlook the inputs, which ultimately are going to really be the most important thing to tell your body to add, lean body mass in that process. So hopefully that answers your question there. But that's like the big thing that we're looking at there with that is really your inputs are going to be the big thing. And then again, the more muscle you want to build and the leaner you are and the more muscle you have, we're going to have to shift to, being in a surplus. And I always tell people this too, at the end of the day, when we look at the 3 energy balances that we can be in, and when it comes to muscle growth, the best is going to be a small surplus at the end of the day, right? If you want to absolutely maximize muscle growth, a small surplus is going to be the best in most situations. Second, maintenance is going to be right there. Again, you can still build a good amount of muscle around your maintenance calories. And then 3, a deficit, right? The larger the deficit, the less likely this is going to be to happen. The smaller the deficit, the more likely you can build a little bit of muscle, again, depending on your current body composition. But at the end of the day, if we're looking at levels here, that small surplus is going to be the one that maximizes, but that doesn't mean that you can't get a lot out of being around maintenance either when it comes to building muscle. Yeah.
And you pointed out that the training variables absolutely at or near the top, right? Like we hear it over and over again, people focusing too much on maybe protein and they're not even training hard. Like that's my problem nowadays is I've talked to people who say, look, I want to lose fat or I want to improve my body composition. I'm not worried about the training part. Tell me about the nutrition. I'm like, no, they go together. And if anything, you need to be training and then the food will follow. So we've kind of put into buckets the type of person or the scenario you're in where you would find success from body recomp near maintenance. It sounds like definitely if you're maybe leaner, if you don't, or no, if you're leaner, you need to build potentially more aggressively. But people who have just a little bit of fat to lose or are not worried about like massive fat loss, training is important, progressive overload, protein, all that stuff. What are the top 1 or 2, I guess, problems people have when they do try to do that? Like, is it they accidentally fall into diets all the time or some lack of consistency? Because maintenance, you talked about it on my show a long time ago. It can be its own challenge, just trying to stay in that realm. So what kind of tracking, what kind of precision, what kind of problems do people have with doing this?
Yeah. So you're basically saying like, hey, someone that is, they want to try to maximize building muscle here around maintenance. Like what are the big problems that people end up kind of running themselves into to not maximize this?
You got it.
That? Yep. Yeah. I mean, like you said, the big thing being the not dialing in your nutrition in terms of, like you said, under eating potentially, meal timing being a big one, right? Where, people maybe are skipping meals. Maybe they have some days where they're higher calorie because they go out and have, they have events, or maybe they just don't really care about focusing on their nutrition on that day. And then they see their scale go up a little bit. And now they, they're like, oh, well, I got to make up for that now. And now I got to go low calorie. Right. And so that is the trick here with being around maintenance is it does give you a little bit less wiggle room in terms of like, you really want to try to limit how often you're skipping meals and like dipping into large deficits, because that is going to be something that can large deficits in the short term, because that is going to be something that over time is going to impact your ability to add muscle and, not overall body composition. So I guess it would be having unstructured nutrition days where they're either too high or too low. And again, 1 or 2 here and there, not going to make or break, but the more often those happen, that's going to lead to suboptimal body composition in the long run. And then again, meal timing, like I said, skipping meals, not having meals around your training sessions. That's one thing that I think people often overlook is the importance of meal timing around their workouts, especially in this, when we're trying to do what we're doing here, where we want to add muscle without really adding much body fat. Your training is going to be super important. And so we want to make sure we set that up in the best way possible. So again, whether that be making sure that however you like to structure your meals around your workouts, but making sure you're well fueled going into your training so you have the best training possible. Making sure you're well hydrated going into your training, right?
Define that, Jeff. Define that for people, Jeff, just so they know that maybe keto is not the answer here. I don't know. Tell me.
What do you mean? What about hydration?
Fueling yourself before your workouts.
Oh, yeah. So just again, making sure that you're not going into your training not having eaten for 3-5+ hours, or again, making sure you do get some carbohydrate intake around your workout, right? Just again, making sure that we're not going into it to where you're hungry, and then that's going to impact your training performance there, right? Because again, that's going to be something that in the short term, maybe you don't really notice it, but over time, you take someone who has really good meal timing around their workouts compared to someone who is just lax around it. Over a year, I guarantee you the person who is on top of their meal timing is going to see much better progress from a body composition standpoint, because they're going to set themselves up from to have good training sessions, which ultimately is the most important thing to send that signal to build muscle. And then also not getting protein around your workouts either, right? Whether that be, hey, maybe you like to go work out when you first wake up, that's fine. So again, after that, make sure you get some protein in at least sometime around your workout. Same thing there. You put someone who nails that versus someone who doesn't. The person who nails their protein around their workout, to me, is going to have better results, when you expand out there. Hydration, again, even a small amount of dehydration, which you can't even really notice, can potentially impact performance. So again, we want to make sure we're hydrated there, right? So from a nutrition perspective, those are the big things. And then obviously, like you said, training is super important, but if we're not on top of our protein, and when I mean protein, overall intake and even timing to an extent, I think you're going to potentially impact your muscle gain and therefore your body composition over the long run.
Yeah. And by the way, you guys, if you're listening, if you don't follow Jeff's show, follow it, because he constantly goes into these details and what to do under different scenarios. So we're not going to dive into how much protein you need and all that fun stuff today, even though we both could do it for hours. What I really want the listener to understand is is this right for me? So, 2 more things come to mind in that context. One is, how do you track this in a way that still motivates you? Because I could see you, especially if you have a new client. Do you ever get a new client that comes to you? It's I want a better body and I want to just be at maintenance. I mean, that to me doesn't sound sexy or like something anybody would ever say. So is this the best protocol for someone who's just doing it for the first time? Because I could see a lack of motivation from a feeling like a lack of direction. How do you address that?
Yeah. So, again, I think it is important to see where the client is at and what they want to do when they come in, right? Because again, if somebody is super knowing what the client wants, I think is super important, right? Mm-hmm. So again, if somebody's hey, ultimately I want to lose body fat, and we look at their history and they haven't dieted recently, okay, well, hey, maybe we are going to push you into a small, a deficit's going to be something that's probably going to be better for you now. But let's say somebody wants to add muscle and this is what they want to do, and we look at their body composition, and I'm hey, we could sit here and we could put you into a surplus and have you gain weight, but do I think that's going to be the best for your long-term body composition? No. So then explaining that, here's the pros and cons of that approach. But from there, I think it comes down to taking a step away from just looking at scale weight, because I think if we just focus on scale weight, that's where you're going to kind of get yourself caught up and think that you're just kind of not making progress. So it's looking at other aspects, right? And what I mean by that is, yes, progress pictures, measurements, but again, even those probably aren't going to be this drastic change, in a 2 to 3 month span, just by what we're doing here with this approach, right? So it's more so hey, training performance, tracking that, seeing that improve, kind of, connecting the dots there with the training performance. Also how they feel as well too, right? That's something that I'm consistently trying to check in with clients on, of how do you feel? Like if you're feeling better, you're feeling strong, you just feel more flexibility, you have more energy from day to day, whatever that is for the person, better libido, whatever it is, like those are things that we're really going to hone in on, because I feel like at maintenance, you can really dial those things in. So really kind of connecting the dots there to show them improvement from that perspective, I think is huge. And then again, if you take blood, like if you get your blood work checked, looking at that, those are the things that I always try to connect to, like looking at those things versus just scale weight, and then explaining to them, hey, if we can nail this down to where, we can get your habits in place here, get your lifestyle habits in place, you're getting stronger, you're adding some muscle, like this is going to set you up for more effective and efficient fat loss when we get there. Yeah. Or maybe you don't even need to do that. Maybe you decide like you love this and you feel super, like your body composition continues to improve. And then maybe you feel like you don't ever really need a fat loss diet, or maybe you do this and then now it's like it makes fat loss something that you just do for a very short amount of time throughout the year, just to kind of clean things up a little bit, versus like being in this endless yo-yoing where like every time you get into fitness, you only focus on dropping weight, don't really build any habits, and then it's just this kind of vicious cycle there. So connecting the dots there with that, I think is super important too.
For sure. And you talked about kind of this magic of maintenance when you were on the show before, that it can be used as a tool in before you ever diet, just to dial things in, after you've gone through fat loss to sustain. Now we're talking about using it strategically to potentially improve your body recomp long-term as a mode to be in. It's hard for me to understand, Jeff, because I just so love change and like constantly seeing things happen. But some people are totally cool with it. Some people are like, I don't want the fatigue of constantly trying to add more or reduce more. So when we do talk about staying at maintenance and not looking at the scale, there still is a scale component in that. Maintenance by definition is staying right here in this like narrow range. How do people do that in terms of using the scale, or are there situations where they don't even need to? Because if you weigh yourself today and then 6 months from now, you're roughly the same, hey, you're kind of at maintenance, right? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I personally, like, I try to get everyone to use a scale just as a tool, and like try to educate them around it. Right. So like, because I do get some people who are like, oh, I just stopped using the scale because it gets in my head. It's like, well, I want to work on that because we need to like figure that out. This is just data at the end of the day. Right. So I like to make sure somebody takes, their scale weight there, because I just think that, again, it's a great way to kind of learn what's actually going on. Because at the end of the day, we do need to take that, because that's going to tell us the energy balance that we are in that process, right? So I think it's super important. As far as like what I'm looking for on the scale, again, this is, as I've said with everything so far, it's going to be very context dependent on the person. But, what I mean by that is if you just got done with a fat loss phase and now we transition you to your maintenance calories, you're going to see this kind of weird stabilization of your scale weight. So that's just all kind of noise, in my opinion, right? Mm-hmm. So there's that. But from there, the biggest thing I'm looking for is just not seeing any trends in a short amount of time, to me, as maintenance, right? And so what I mean by that is if we're consistently seeing, when we look at your average weight for the week and we see it trending either up or down, that you're in either a surplus or a small deficit. And then from there, it's like, well, if we're finding that, hey, you're feeling good, your body composition is really changing, maybe we can kind of continue on that trend. But if we truly want to just stay at maintenance, it's, hey, I just don't want to see any trends in a short period of time, right? And so again, that could be, hey, 1 week you're 167, next week you're 166.2. Somebody might think they're in a deficit, but then the next week you're back to 167. As long as we kind of see this like 2.5% plus or minus, and then again, over time, maybe it is drifting in. So just for example, my last fat loss phase ended in the end of 2023-ish, like October-ish timeframe. I was 155, spent the next couple months purposely gaining a little bit of weight, letting things kind of stabilize a little bit. And then from there, I gained up to about 162. And then really over the last like 60-ish weeks, it's been between 163 and 166, and it's kind of slowly trended up that way. Now, somebody could be like, well, dude, you're in a small surplus, but really it to me, it's maintained really over time, right? So we're talking maintenance is not going to be this exact number of like, oh, hey, you're 166.6. Now you're going to stay there every single time you go in, right? You may see it trend one way or the other just a little bit, but it's those short-term trends that we just don't want to see there.
This is a very important point, Jeff, I think, for people, because if you're thinking of maintenance as literally an exact number all the time, you could be setting yourself up for failure, right? Because you could be dipping into deficits. And I don't know about you, when I think body recomp, I really think of it as a very tiny deficit. Like to me, that's kind of inefficient, right? Because your body will adapt and keep you at maintenance, but then now you're not eating as much as you could. So you're just never quite fully recovered and you're not really losing fat either. So is what you're saying is maybe maybe one of the best or efficient approach is to kind of be a little bit on top, like almost have that upward drift, because 3 to 6 pounds in a year or two, it really is nothing. And frankly, if you're going to build muscle and that's denser tissue, like you said earlier, you're probably going to want to have a little extra weight anyway. Is that where the thinking is?
Yeah, pretty much too, right? Like people get themselves in the trap of thinking that maintenance, they fat loss diet and they get down to say 144.3 and they think maintenance is literally 144.3. And so they end up, like you said, getting themselves into this artificially low maintenance calories where their body's adapted to that. And now, they don't feel as good, right? Their body's just not thriving at that point. So what I suggest is at that point, hey, you're going to increase your calories a little bit and you may see your weight again, kind of stabilize a little bit, but you're feeling good. And then, again, we're not necessarily trying to push weight up, but if it trends up a little bit over, say, a 3, 6, 12-month span, as long as you're feeling good, body composition still looks good, based on all the things that we're tracking, performance is good. I'm not concerned about your weight not like coming up, a couple pounds, right? So again, somebody could argue of like, oh, hey, that's not maintenance, then that's a small surplus. Well, then, okay, maybe that's a case. But to me, that's still technically, you're not trying to push scale weight up every single time you weigh in or over multiple weeks, right? Because
for sure, especially when the goal is body recomp, the goal isn't to be at maintenance. That's just a route to get there, right?
Really, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do here is we're just trying to fuel your body enough, okay, to make sure that you're giving it the micronutrients it needs. When we're at maintenance, everything just flows much better, right? When you're giving your body enough fuel. In that process, right? So again, libido is going to be in the best position there. Again, you're going to feel your best here in this, right? Your blood work and everything should be in a good spot as long as we are continuing to do all these things outside of like the sleep, stress, solid nutrition, training, right? I always tell people, just because if your scale weight isn't trending down and you want it to, but you're doing all those things, you're going to see a different body composition over time by doing those things, right? So I always try to frame it as that. And again, our body needs this period of time to be around these calories. And my whole thing on this is, if let's say somebody, they do this fat loss, they do muscle gain, but they still have some body fat they need to lose. This is the perfect position for you to be for, say, 6-9 months out of the year, because you're putting your body in the best position to feel good where it's at. You're continuing to build your habits. That beats somebody who still has body fat to lose and they're losing body fat, but then they try and go into a large surplus and gain weight over time, right? But again, not to confuse people, it's okay if you see your weight come up a little bit during that period of time. The key is to just not try to push it continuously going up, right? That's where people gain body fat, and that's where I think people get themselves stuck long term in that process.
For sure. Yeah. Unless you're doing it on purpose, right? Like I just gained 15, 17 pounds and it's like, and I got to pay for it by fat loss dieting the other way. But so just very specific tip for folks then, if they're working with a coach who gives them a target, or they're using a tracking app and they have a target where they think their maintenance calories are at this point, do you recommend slightly overshooting on a daily basis? Is there a mental strategy you recommend to make sure you're in the right spot?
Yeah. This, again, I hate to say this, but it's going to depend on the client, right? Like, again, if they are super, if they're a little bit on the leaner side, they really want to maximize muscle growth, I'm going to say, hey, it's okay if you go a little bit over, right? If someone is maybe a little bit more, I don't know the word I'm kind of looking for here. They really want to be careful with gaining body fat mentally. I can just tell there's someone who wants to be careful with that. I'm going to be, hey, maybe we shoot for just a tiny bit lower, right? But we're going to pair that with their biofeedback and everything like that. And I want to see how they're feeling there. And then obviously, again, continuing to monitor their body composition, because that's going to me, that's going to be the biggest indicator, because I think where you want to be careful with is people are very good at underreporting their caloric intake, right? So this is where it comes into okay, in theory, in a perfect world, maybe we do kind of have them push slightly above what their quote unquote maintenance calories are, whatever that is for that person. But in practice, this is where I like to rely on okay, here's what I've seen. I know that people tend to underestimate their caloric intake. Let's maybe you can be a little bit lower than that, right?
I agree. Different people have different mental framing around targets and, like some people want to hit the target right on because they're kind of robotic about it. Like, I love hitting my targets. Others always have to be in one direction or else they feel like they fail every day. Not that we want to have them in that mental state, but it depends. Like you said, it depends. So we covered a lot of go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, hopefully that gives somebody an idea of like, hey, where you're kind of at, that gives you a better idea of where you should kind of focus on. And then again, looking at your trends, where's that trending at over time? If you're slightly seeing your body weight trend down, then maybe you do need to be someone who pushes it a little bit higher as well too there. So.
See, this is why I like to talk to guys like you, Jeff, because we all have slightly nuanced takes on this. Like I would probably fall in the trap on my podcast of saying, just always go over a little bit if you're trying to be at maintenance, because I've seen too many people diet under. But then I recall the clients who need to be careful because they're trying to avoid gaining too much. So again, whatever resonates with you, you got to go with that. Is there any last tip or pitfall that we didn't cover related to body recomp at maintenance you want listeners to know about?
Yep. So again, like I said, I just think people tend to overly focus on, hey, surplus, gaining weight, losing weight, when we need to focus on the training stimulus that we're sending, because that ultimately is going to be the most important. People overlook that. Just because you're training doesn't necessarily mean you're doing that in the most efficient way. There, again, nutrition, obviously not only calories and macros, but like quality of food that you're bringing in, making sure you get enough protein. And then a couple that I see people commonly overlook are going to be their lifestyle. They're, again, setting up their environment, right? Whether that's your relationships, that's your environment in terms of your work, what you're around all the time. Sleep is a huge one as well too. And not only, hey, just get 8 hours of sleep, but sleep quality, like making sure we're setting ourselves up for good sleep. And you can kind of put in your circadian health and circadian rhythm into that. And then stress management, right? And stress management being not only, oh, hey, I had a stressful day at work, but again, thinking about all the stress that we're putting on our body and thinking about it from that standpoint and balancing that out to where, hey, we want to have a good balance of parasympathetic, sympathetic inputs and making sure we're balancing that out and we're not letting it get too far on, say, the sympathetic side of things, right? So again, that's going to look different for everybody, what that is, but figuring out what you're doing to your body that's adding stress and trying to bring that down. Those are going to be things I think people often overlook and can make the world of a difference and really allow you to get more out of every calorie that you put into your body. Is probably the best way I could put that.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it, because smart, efficient, doing it the right way. Otherwise, you're kind of wasting time. And you've got some really good content on this. I know you do these workshops occasionally, these free workshops on body recomp that kind of go through the big pillars. So if you guys are interested in learning more, definitely reach out to Jeff. And if you enjoyed this conversation where we talked about body recomp at maintenance, as I mentioned earlier, we recorded a companion episode right now in Jeff's feed, the Mind Muscle Connection. Go follow the show, download it, listen to it. That's why we're keeping these a little bit shorter today, where I interview Jeff where he interviews me. I get confused about using what we're calling a near maintenance approach. So that's more when you want to step on the gas pedal, go maybe a little more aggressive, but still get body recomp as opposed to necessarily going all out in one direction. And we're going to get deep into that there. So click the link in the show notes or go search the Mind Muscle Connection on your favorite podcast app. Check it out. And Jeff, thanks as always, man, for collaborating and coming on the show.
Yep, this is super fun, dude.